Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. Sorry, I'm a little bit under the weather today for this Ukraine War Update Extra, giving you extra information and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war. I hope I make sense to you. Where are we going to go to first? Well, I think it would be churlish not to start with the New York Times and Zeit pieces on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, only because there's a further article that's come out that casts even more light onto this. If we rewind a little bit, we can hopefully remember Seymour Hersh, the somewhat controversial journalist who did a whole piece saying that he had this intelligence source clearly saying it was a US and it was the Norwegians, US and Norwegian armed forces combined to blow up. And the pipeline, he had all this evidence supposedly, but his piece was quite controversial, obviously, because of the conclusions that it was the US that blew up the pipeline, but also a lot of the claims he made didn't actually hold water or gas. So it was, yeah, there were loads of problems. And then I wrote a massive article analysing the whole situation and indeed his piece, and found his piece wanting, but I was still unsure as who did it. I was like 55% Russia, 45% US, and I kind of like dismissed any third-party entities. And then these newspaper articles came out today from the New York Times and Zeit, and now the Times, London Times, talking about this new evidence that has supposedly been kicking around for months, pointing the fingers at a third-party entity, pro-Ukrainian figures, possibly Ukrainians themselves, but not government-sanctioned figures who were behind this. And there are a whole bunch of theories as to who it is, which Ukrainian oligarch or billionaire or whatever is actually behind this. I could throw you a bunch of names, but it would be a little bit dodgy to do that. I mean, there are a number that I have found out that could well be those mentioned, but we'll go on to that in a second. I just want to play you this now. So the Seymour Hersh article really, really polarized people. A load of people jumped on it and saying, yes, this is amazing. Look at all this very detailed information. This is true. Oh my goodness, this is true. And I had loads of conversations and arguments with people about this. And I was like, yeah, I'm not sure it is. I'm not saying it's not the US. Like, I'm keeping an open mind here. But this article isn't, I think, all it's cracked up to be. And a lot of people were attacking me for that. A lot of people then also attacking Seymour Hersh and saying, well, this is clearly nonsense. Then someone posted this interview with Democracy Now! With him a couple of weeks ago. And just this, I'm going to play you like 10 seconds here. And this, in my opinion, is super damning for Seymour Hersh's credibility and where he's coming from. Now, we already know that with his Syria articles previously, he touts a very pro-Russian narrative. He's quite favoured by Russian media sources who often either quote him or, I think, occasionally speak to him. Well, check this out. Yeah, if I turn the volume up.
Am I that old? 300 years. Anyway, the bottom line is the stories I've been getting about the war, particularly beginning in full, and that's what gets interesting, have been pretty dire. The Russians, I think the end is just a question of time. Right now, it's a question of how many more people Zelensky wants to kill of his own people. It's going to be over.
That to me, right. So he's thinking Zelensky is just murdering his people. Just how it's all over for Ukraine. It's all over for Ukraine. It's just a matter of time and how many people Zelensky wants to kill. Right. Now you understand where he's coming from, and imagine how much that is going to taint the sort of narrative he will be looking for. So we all look for narratives to confirm our worldviews. And here I think he's doing that and arguably constructing an article to defend that narrative. But that's clearly his narrative. He is anti-Zelensky, anti-Ukraine, which is odd because I don't know how you can look at this situation and fairly and be that sort of person. I've said this many times before. It just, like, morally speaking, that's not on. Like, and it's seeing Ukraine as not as its own self-determining country full of people with the right to self-determination. It's seeing Ukraine as either part of NATO expansionism or part of Russian imperialism, and forgetting to ask the Ukrainians actually what they want and who they want to be, and what politics they stand for, and if they want to be part of NATO, if they want to be part of the EU, then how about we ask them? Don't just see them as a pawn for for NATO and the EU or for Russia. Yes, they might be those things as well, but first and foremost, these are people with the right to self-determination. And I think Seymour Hersh is just, I know that's just one comment, arguably taken out of context, but I think that tells you all you need to know about him. So then we have these pieces coming out today, and either these pieces are wrong. So that's the New York Times, Zeit, the Times, and basically Washington Post. Basically, you could say, oh, it's all just mainstream media, and you could be the sort of conspiracy theorist type thinker, not saying a conspiracy theorist, but that kind of thinking, that kind of contrarian thinker who would side with Seymour Hersh and his reliance on one single anonymous source and say that trumps all of these articles. And it could be that these articles are giving a narrative to counteract that Seymour Hersh narrative. Seymour Hersh could still be correct, and these could all be wrong. These could be posted by the American government to react to that narrative. However, this narrative doesn't really help the American government, by point of fact that this narrative leaves Ukraine in a really precarious position, and therefore Ukraine's allies in a precarious position, because it points fingers at Ukrainian people doing this against Germany and Russia together. So anyway, the point is that either Hersh or this narrative is incorrect. Like, one of them has to be wrong, and potentially both of them are wrong. And it could still be Russia, or it could still be the US, but not in the way that these two articles stipulate. But these two cannot both be correct. That much is true. Now, these articles are suitably vague, or at least the New York Times one is. The Zeit one has a lot more detail, talking about the boat and evidence of who was on the boat and when it was hired, and evidence for explosives being on that boat, and German police and all that kind of stuff. But just to read you a few bits from the New York Times one that originally broke, new intelligence reviewed by US officials suggests that a pro-Ukrainian group carried out the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines last year, a step toward determining responsibility for an act of sabotage that has confounded investigators on both sides of the Atlantic for months. US officials said that they had no evidence of Zelensky of Ukraine or his top lieutenants were involved in the operation, or that the perpetrators were acting on the direction of any Ukrainian government officials. Officials who have reviewed the intelligence said that they believe the saboteurs were most likely Ukrainian or Russian nationals, or some combination of the two. US officials said no American or British nationals were involved. Now, these are officials, really kind of vague, unknown people. But yeah, loads of claims thrown in there. Just a few bits towards the end. The new intelligence provided no evidence so far that the Ukrainian government's complicity in the attack on the pipeline, and US officials say that Biden administration's level of trust in Mr. Zelensky and his senior national security team has been steadily increasing. And they would have known this already, by the way. So the idea is that this has been kicking around for some months. The question is, why hasn't it come out? We'll come to that in a second. Mats Lundqvist, a senior prosecutor leading Sweden's investigation into the Nord Stream explosions, told the New York Times last month that his country's hunt for the perpetrators was continuing. Quote, "It's my job to find those who blew up Nord Stream. To help me, I have our country's security service," Mr. Lundqvist said. Do I think it was Russia that blew up Nord Stream? I never thought so. It's not logical. And this is something that I said previously. They were the least likely in terms of what the rationale was for it, more likely in terms of how the operation was constructed. But as he continues, but as is the case of a murder, you have to be open to all possibilities. Well, yes. Now, the Times, London Times, has come out with a new article that basically says, we've known for some time that actually, and it's kind of like the floodgates are open. So what seems to happen in these situations is the press has some idea, but it's too risky, and there are ramifications, and you can get done by your governments for releasing this kind of stuff. So you only release it when the time is right and when you're sure, and probably when you've got to get say so of your government. So in the terms of New York Times and Zeit, that was probably sanctioned because we've got to a point where that was sanctionable, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then once that is sanctioned, then other news organizations come out and said, yep, we did actually know this, and here's what we're going to add to this. So you had the Washington Post coming out with something, and now the Times here coming out with something saying the name of the suspected private sponsor, a Ukrainian not affiliated with President Zelensky's government, has been circulating in intelligence circles for months, but not revealed. NATO officials, it appears, wanted to protect Ukraine from a public spat with Germany, which had been dragging its heels over whether to deliver vital military aid, including Leopard 2 tanks and RST air defense systems. Right. This was at a time where everyone's having a go at Germany, and then Germany said, all right, we will give a whole bunch of stuff, right? Had this come out then, guaranteed that stuff, well, not guaranteed, but that stuff almost certainly wouldn't have been given to Ukraine. And so that would have been really damaging. This is damaging to, this is surely going to be damaging for Ukraine-German relations, and that's going to be, Germany are now really, really, really important in the allied support for Ukraine, and this news coming out is probably going to be a really big problem going forward. Indeed, as the Times says, the idea of Ukrainians driving a vehicle laden with explosives through Poland to launch an attack on a German pipeline from German soil will particularly grate on the German public. But it concludes at the end, his name will surely appear eventually, particularly given that he appears to have left a particular calling card. Ukraine's relationship with its allies will fare better if the individual comes clean. So it appears that they know who he is. I've seen certain things online as to who it might be, but I don't know exactly. One person, some people have been mentioning particularly, but I wouldn't know. I mean, these are sort of kind of Ukrainian, very rich Ukrainian, powerful people. But yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that's the situation now, and it is interesting because there is enough stuff here to make me go, my goodness, this probably could be reasonable. But I don't know for sure, and I am just going to remain on the fence for a little while. Wait till the dust settles, see what else comes out in the next couple of days, see what explosions there are going to be politically speaking between Ukraine and Germany, or whether that gets really well managed. I don't know, but this is certainly something to watch out for sure. Right, let's move on to something very different. And by the way, later in this video, I'm going to splice in some previous recording I've done on South Korean munitions manufacturing. So if I'm wearing something different, it's not because, hey, I'm that famous that I need to change every so often to, and can't wear the same thing twice, as I'm sure you're aware. Anyway, thread, right. For those seeking a greater understanding of the Russian soldiers' perspective on the war, motivation, and attitudes, I recommend reading this thread, as I decided to compile and generalize some material. So this is a generalization. He does give you the caveats here. I was hesitant to publish this thread as I cannot provide the original evidence until the war is over. However, I feel it is important to share the information and allow readers to form their own opinions. The materials primarily consist of over hundreds of conversations obtained from chat applications on the devices of deceased Russian soldiers and confessions from some prisoners of war. While it may not be a representative sample, I want to discuss some noticeable commonalities. It may be surprising that discussions among soldiers about topics such as a perceived NATO threat, denazification, world war, or other forms of patriotic propaganda frequently promoted on Russian television are not as prevalent as one might assume. It appears that for many soldiers and officers, this war is solely a source of financial gain, with little regard for the immoral acts they commit. In light of this, I've assembled a list, in no specific order, of subjects that Russian soldiers regularly converse about. So, and this is taken from, from those sources he was talking about. Upgrading their apartments with their spouses, making plans to trade an apartment and add more rooms, buying cars for themselves or their spouses, paying off mortgages, car payments, similar debts, paying off child support debts, getting combat veteran ID to receive state benefits for the rest of their life, um, saving money to take their families on vacation by the sea, getting new furniture, home electronics, smartphones. It appears that a significant number of soldiers view the war as an opportunity to earn money and frequently engage in casual conversations about their expected financial gains from the war. The following is slightly edited conversation which highlights this attitude. Quote, we have been shelling the Chochols, which is an ethnic slur for Ukrainians, in the town for 3 days. If we finish them off soon, I hope that our commander will let me go home by summer. With my salary, I should have enough savings so we can buy a new car and drive to the sea. Interestingly, so that's the end of that conversation. Interestingly, these conversations sometimes intertwine the discussions about salary issues as soldiers try to understand why they haven't received their compensation or why they've received less than expected. However, the topic of payment deserves a separate conversation. It is misleading to claim that mobilized soldiers are victims of the war and had no choice. Conversations among soldiers suggest that few express criticism of the war itself. Instead, criticisms tend to focus on the perceived incompetence of the command or the perceived insufficient use of force to win. Some believe that they should stop playing around and just raise entire cities or conduct nuclear strikes so they can go home earlier. Keep that in mind when they will tell you about the "we just followed the orders" story. "We just followed orders" is not a defense for war crimes, by the way, and that was found out in the Nuremberg trials and whatnot. So you cannot use that as a defense. That someone says, sorry to say, but a professional army, meaning not a volunteer or conscript one, runs with people that fight for a month's salary or of a reward for objectives accomplished. They fight to send money home. It has been like this for ages and ages. And Tatragami says that works until you believe that it's worth it. If your chances to die are over 70% for every combat mission, or you stop getting money, such army will deteriorate quickly, which is why it's important to acknowledge these points. And, further discussion ensues. But Tatragami goes on to say, I understand what you're saying, but there is an important difference. Unlike them, we do not fight for a trip to the sea, for an opportunity to buy a better apartment. Yes, people talk about everything, but personal enrichment is not even on the table. Motivation matters. And so, he gets involved in conversations about this. But the idea is that when you see a lot of these videos as well, so we hear a lot of conversations or intercepted telephone conversations, and they are often, ones that have been selected because they say X and Y is really bad, blah, blah, blah. But Tatragami is saying there's an awful lot of conversations that aren't, posted that just show that people are just really interested in money, and that's their main motivation for fighting. So I think it's very interesting. So on a related level here is another video of how mobilized troops are not happy. So this is how surprising. Mobilized from Belgorod, which is just over the border from Ukraine, complain that they are treated like cattle, were lied to regarding their duties instead of public order tasks. They're thrown into battles as meat, got taken away. They had all their documents taken away and didn't even meet their commanders. Now, as some people have been saying, when they complain about these things, they don't complain about how terrible the war is. These guys aren't complaining about the war. They're complaining about their conditions. But there is some rationale to say that they can't really complain about the war, because if they do, they really will get done in. They'll get even more serious ramifications than those they'll get into for saying stuff like this. But we have also apparently started to see a lot more groups of soldiers. In fact, I thought I had one here. Bear with me 2 seconds. Let's see if I can find it. It's actually the one that I was just showing you, but actually Dimitri from Ward's Translated has translated it. Why this one is particularly different is that they are actually not just complaining, but refusing to fight. And so we are now getting used to almost daily videos from Russian mobilized soldiers. This one is different. The commander of his platoon is not appealing to Putin, but directly stating he is refusing to obey orders. These men were transferred to DPR for meat assaults and lost a major part of the personnel due to complete lack of training and reconnaissance. So not only what Noel Reports was saying about these guys, what their complaints were, but they are refusing to fight. Now, there's been growing evidence in particularly Vuhledar recently, where there have been commanders who have refused to fight. In fact, riot police have been sent in and whatnot, but apparently that is still an issue uh, because of the massive losses that are made. Because at the end of the day, the powers that be are saying no, you need to go and attack there. Yeah, but we've just literally seen like 10 units go and do that, and they've all died or they've all been taken apart, and now you're asking us to go and do the same thing. Like, no. Uh, I don't know what the ramifications for saying no are, but it is significant that there are an increasing number of Russian units who are refusing to fight. I'm just going to have a quick look with you at the South Korean arms industry. They're exporting billions in arms, just not to Ukraine. As traditional weapons suppliers like the US face wartime production shortages, South Korea has stepped up to fill the gap while not trying to provoke Moscow. So this is really a fine line. It's like, right, we don't want to provoke Moscow because we need Moscow to be in support of the sanctions on North Korea that we want to put in place. However, we are generally in support of Ukraine because we're in support of America, and geopolitically we're aligned. So how can we help? Well, actually, by really selling a lot of arms and upping our arms manufacturing industry to backfill everyone else who is giving stuff to Ukraine. So it's not like we're giving to Ukraine, but we are facilitating the donations to Ukraine, which is just as important, arguably. Uh, it's a necessary component. You know, you will not have Poland giving as much stuff as they can, especially being so close to Russia that as they are, without knowing that they've got, in this case, K9s coming from South Korea. As South Korea expands, so this is in the New York Times. As South Korea expands weapons sales globally, it has refused to send lethal assistance to Ukraine itself. Instead, it has focused on filling the world's rearmament gap while resisting the direct role in arming Ukraine, imposing strict export control rules on all its sales. So this is rather similar to Germany and Switzerland. Unlike American allies in Europe that scaled down their militaries and arms production capacities at the end of the Cold War, South Korea has kept a robust domestic defense supply chain to meet demand from its own armed forces and to guard against North Korea. It goes on later. The orders from Poland were a boon. So Poland has ordered a bunch of stuff from South Korea for the reasons I've told you. The orders from Poland were a boon to the government of President Yoon Suk Yeol, who has vowed to make his country the fourth largest weapons exporter by 2027 after the US, Russia, and France. So France is the third biggest, Russia second, US first. Russia will not be in the top five. I'm pretty sure of that. Like, no one's going to be buying their stuff. They can't make their stuff. They can't fulfill orders. They're sanctioned. I can't see that they're going to be anywhere near the top. I don't know, top 10. Really, I'd really love to know the details of their export figures for 2022, and I'd love to know what their predicted figures are for 2023. I can't see them making jack. Now, South Korea, I think we're in eighth. They're planning on being fourth. I think they'll probably move up to third without too much problem there. From 2017 to 2021, South Korea was the fastest growing among the world's top 25 arms exporters, ranking number 8 with 2.8% share of the global market, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. I shared you a video sometime back about South Korea talking about how they're 8th and they were going to move up the ranks, and that was a really good video. That was before it landed contracts with Poland, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates last year. So it's really ramping up, and in fact, they've got to produce. This particular factory has to increase its production lines. You know, it has to get 2 more whole production lines in just to fulfill its orders. So when Seoul agreed to sell artillery shells to help the US replenish its stockpiles, it insisted on an explicit export control condition that the end user would be the US, a rule that it has had in place for all its global arms deals, including its contracts with Poland for decades. Nonetheless, some South Korean weapons technology has already made its way to Ukraine. The Polish Krab howitzers that were sent to Ukraine use a chassis from the South Korean K9. So it's like a hybrid collaboration, but they've been able to get the Krabs to Ukraine. South Korea's Defense Acquisition Program Administration refused to comment on whether the transfer violated export controls. Quote, it's possible for South Korean weapons to end up in Ukraine through other countries, said Yang Uk, a weapons expert at the Asan Institute of Policy Studies in Seoul. There is doubt how vigorously South Korea would enforce its export controls in such cases. There's a bit of a grey area here, and you would imagine with the amount of pressure going on that those South Korean pieces of equipment might find their way to Ukraine somehow. South Korean sweetens its arms export deals, by offering to transfer technology and facilitate local production, enhancing the domestic defense industries of its buyers. Also, this helps like the backlog. So if they can't fulfill contracts, because they've just got too many orders, then actually allowing countries to build their own South Korean products indigenously frees up their own production, as well as they still get in the money for that by being made under license. But also, those countries are going to want to do that kind of deal because it then stimulates their own manufacturing sectors and economies. Turkey built its main battle tank Altay and its T-155 howitzers based on the South Korean models. Hanwha is building a factory in Australia to assemble K9s with local suppliers. Most of the South Korean howitzers Poland is buying will be produced in Poland with local partners. South Korea knows firsthand how powerful such incentives can be. So watch this space. South Korea, while they may not be giving stuff first up front to Ukraine, they are facilitating other countries to give those pieces of equipment up front. So that's really significant. And hopefully that's of interest to you. That is the arms industry of South Korea really stepping up. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all the support I get. If you want to pop along to uasupporter.com and put /ATP at the end, the /ATP will allow me to get some small amount of commission for anything you buy from there. So if you want to show your support for Ukraine by wearing some hats with some Ukrainian emblems, then go for it and check out uasupporter.com /ATP. Anyway, take care. Speak to you soon.